I found a pregnancy test in my boyfriend's backpack, and I wasn't pregnant. I was looking for Damon's phone charger because mine died and I knew he had like 3 of them floating around in his stuff. We've been together for almost 2 years, living in my apartment that I pay for because he's been between jobs. Yeah, I know. I can already hear the comments. Anyway, I'm digging through his backpack looking for this stupid charger, and my hand hit something in the side pocket. I pull it out and it's a pregnancy test. A positive pregnancy test. I literally stood there holding this thing for like 5 full minutes trying to make sense of it. I haven't taken a pregnancy test in months. I'm on birth control. This isn't mine. The packaging was recent, you could tell it wasn't some old thing. My brain was doing backflips trying to figure out what the hell I was looking at. When Damon got home from the gym, I was sitting on the couch with this test on the coffee table in front of me. I didn't even know how to start the conversation, so I just pointed at it and asked him what it was doing in his backpack. He barely glanced at it before saying it was his sister Alicia's, and she'd asked him to hold on to it for her because she didn't want their mom finding it at her place. She lives with their parents still, so I guess that made sense. But also it felt weird because why would she give it to him to hold instead of just throwing it away literally anywhere else? He was acting totally normal about it. Like this was the most obvious explanation in the world. Said Alicia had been scared and took the test at work, then asked if he could keep it until she figured out what to do. I asked why she wouldn't just toss it in a public bathroom trash can, and he got kind of defensive, saying I was making a big deal out of nothing and his sister trusted him. The way he said it made me feel like I was being paranoid for even questioning it. But here's the thing. Something felt off. Like that feeling in your gut when someone's lying but you can't quite put your finger on why. Damon kept saying I was overreacting, that it was just his sister being careful. And then he changed the subject to what we were having for dinner. Just moved right past it like we'd been discussing the weather. I waited until he went to take a shower that night and I called Alicia. My hands were actually shaking when I dialed because part of me felt crazy for not just believing him. But I had to know. When she picked up, I tried to sound casual, asked how she was doing, made small talk for a minute. Then I just came out with it. Told her I'd found something of hers that Damon had been holding for her and wanted to make sure she was okay. She had no idea what I was talking about. None. I could hear the genuine confusion in her voice when she asked what I meant. So I told her about the pregnancy test and there was this long silence before she said she definitely wasn't pregnant, hadn't taken any test, and had no clue why her brother would say that. She actually laughed a little, like she thought maybe this was some weird joke, and said she's been single for like 6 months and definitely hasn't needed to take any pregnancy tests. I thanked her and hung up before she could ask more questions because I needed to think. Damon was still in the shower and I was sitting there realizing he just lied straight to my face with the most believable story, and I'd almost fallen for it. When he got out, I didn't say anything. I acted completely normal the rest of the night because I didn't know what else to do. My mind was racing, but I needed to figure out what was actually going on before I confronted him again. Something was seriously wrong, and I was not about to let him gaslight me into thinking I was crazy. The next day, while he was out, I went through his phone records on our shared account. Yeah, I know some people will say that's a privacy violation, but honestly, at that point, I didn't care. I needed answers, and he'd already proven he'd lie to me. What I found made me actually nauseous. There were hundreds of calls to one number I didn't recognize. Like multiple times a day, every single day, going back months. Long calls too. 20 minutes, 30 minutes, hour-long conversations. Late at night after I'd gone to bed. During his lunch breaks. Times when he'd told me he was out with his friend Martin, but apparently he was on the phone instead. I sat there staring at these records for probably 20 minutes, my brain trying to catch up with what I was seeing. This wasn't just some random number he'd called a few times. This was constant, ongoing, daily communication with someone I knew nothing about. And he'd never once mentioned whoever this was. I grabbed my phone before I could talk myself out of it and called the number. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. It rang 3 times and then a woman answered, young sounding, maybe mid-20s. She answered all bright and happy with, "Baby, did you tell her yet?" I hung up immediately, just pressed end call and sat there staring at my phone. Baby. She called him baby. And did you tell her yet? Tell me what exactly? I tried to call back like 5 seconds later because I needed to know who this was and what the hell was going on, but it went straight to voicemail. Generic voicemail. No name. I called again. Voicemail. Again. Voicemail. She'd either turned her phone off or blocked my number after seeing it call back. So now I'm sitting here writing this because I literally cannot sleep. I have a positive pregnancy test that belongs to someone, a girlfriend who calls my boyfriend baby, and hundreds of phone calls I knew nothing about. Damon is asleep in our bed. Well, my bed in my apartment, like nothing is wrong. I know what you're all thinking. I know what this looks like. But I need to be sure before I do anything because once I go there, there's no coming back from it. Tomorrow I'm calling a private investigator that my coworker Naomi recommended when she went through something similar last year. I need to know exactly what I'm dealing with here before I confront him again, because clearly just asking him gets me absolutely nowhere except more lies. I'll update once I know more. Right now I'm just trying to keep it together and act normal until I have all the facts. Wish me luck because I have a feeling I'm going to need it. Update. Okay, so I hired the PI and holy shit, you guys were right about everything. Every single red flag you called out in the comments was correct, and it's somehow even worse than I thought. First off, shout out to everyone who told me to screenshot the phone records before he could delete anything. I did that immediately, and I'm so glad, because 2 days later I checked again, and suddenly that number had way fewer calls showing. The PI I hired is this woman named Sally, not her real name, who Naomi used last year when her husband was acting shady. We met at this diner near my work on Thursday afternoon, and I showed her everything. The pregnancy test, screenshots of the phone records, the timeline of when he started acting different. She didn't even seem surprised, just nodded and said she'd seen this exact scenario at least a dozen times this year alone. That should have made me feel better, but it actually made me feel worse because apparently I'm just another clueless girlfriend who didn't see the obvious. Sally told me she'd need about a 1 or 2 weeks to get me solid information, and that I should act completely normal in the meantime. So that's what I did. I went to work, came home, made dinner, watched TV with Damon like everything was fine. The hardest part was when he'd kiss me or tell me he loved me, and I had to just smile and act like my entire world wasn't falling apart. He had no idea I was onto him. None. He was still leaving his phone face down on the counter and taking calls in the other room and making up excuses about where he was going. On Saturday, he told me he was going to help Martin move some furniture. I said okay and watched him leave. Then literally 15 minutes later, I drove to Martin's place because I still had his address from when we went to his birthday party last year. Martin answered the door in basketball shorts, looking confused about why I was there. When I asked if Damon was around, he said he hadn't seen him in like 2 weeks because he'd been busy with work. Just stood there scratching his head asking if everything was okay. I made up some excuse about getting my days mixed up and left. Drove around for like an hour just processing the fact that he was lying about something as stupid and basic as where he was spending his Saturday afternoon. If he's lying about that, what else is he lying about? Everything, apparently, as I was about to find out. Sally called me Monday evening while I was at Target picking up laundry detergent. I literally abandoned my cart in the middle of the aisle and went out to my car to take the call because I couldn't wait another second. She told me she had information and we should meet in person. I drove straight to her office, which is in this strip mall next to a tax place and a nail salon. What she told me made me want to throw up right there in her office. The woman's name is Kaylee. She's 24. She works as a receptionist, and she's been dating Damon for 7 months. Not just hooking up, not just talking, actually dating. Like going out to restaurants, spending weekends together, meeting each other's friends, dating. Sally had photos. So many photos. Pictures of them at the movies, at some outdoor concert in July, walking around the mall holding hands, sitting in his car outside her apartment building. In every single photo, he looked exactly like he does with me. Smiling, relaxed, happy, like he didn't have a whole other girlfriend at home. But here's where it gets absolutely insane. Kaylee is 12 weeks pregnant. Sally confirmed it through some investigation I don't fully understand. 12 weeks means she got pregnant in like August. Right around the time Damon and I went to my cousin's wedding, and he told me he couldn't wait to start our future together. I asked Sally how she could be sure the baby was his, and she showed me more photos. Pictures of Kaylee holding up ultrasound images while Damon kissed her cheek. Pictures of them looking at baby stuff in Target. A screenshot from Kaylee's Instagram story from 3 weeks ago showing a pair of tiny baby shoes with a caption about, "Can't wait to meet you, baby girl." And Damon had commented with heart emojis. I literally could not speak for like 5 minutes. Sally just sat there letting me process while I stared at these photos of my boyfriend, living an entire second life. She told me there was more, and honestly I didn't think I could handle more, but I needed to know everything. Damon had been telling Kaylee that he was living with a roommate. Me, his girlfriend of 2 years, he'd downgraded to roommate status. And that the living situation was temporary until he could afford his own place. He'd told her that we were moving in together next month, that he'd already talked to his roommate about moving out and everything was set. My apartment, the apartment that I pay for. He was planning to kick me out and move his pregnant girlfriend into my home. Sally had followed them to this Italian restaurant in the shopping district last Thursday and sat 2 tables away. She recorded audio on her phone, which is legal in our state as long as you're in a public place. And she played parts of it for me. I could hear Damon's voice clear as day talking about paint colors for a nursery. Soft yellow or mint green, what did Kaylee think? And Kaylee was going on about where the crib should go. Maybe against the wall with a window so the baby could have natural light in the mornings. Then Damon told her the second bedroom was currently being used as an office, but it would be completely cleared out by the time she moved in. That his roommate was already looking for other places and everything was on track for next month. They were planning to turn my home office into a baby room, and he was sitting there in some nice restaurant discussing it like it was already a done deal. Sally had more recordings too. Them at Target walking through the baby section talking about what they needed to buy first. Him at Home Depot with her looking at paint samples and discussing whether they should do an accent wall. Multiple conversations over multiple days all about moving her into my apartment and setting up their life in my space. I asked Sally how he thought he was going to pull this off, and she told me she'd overheard them having coffee at the Starbucks near Kaylee's work 3 days ago. Sally had been sitting right behind them with her laptop pretending to work and recording the whole conversation. According to what she captured, Damon had laid out his entire plan to Kaylee. He was going to tell me that his aunt was sick and needed to move in for medical care. He'd asked me to move out temporarily, to give them space and then just never let me move back in. Kaylee had actually laughed and asked what if I said no, and Damon told her not to worry. He'd make it sound like such an emergency that I'd feel like a terrible person if I didn't help out. Once I was gone and had broken the lease to move somewhere else, they'd just stay, and I'd be the one stuck paying the penalties. Sally played me that part of the recording. I heard Kaylee ask if he felt bad about lying to me like that, and Damon said something about how I'd be fine, that I made good money and could easily find another place. Like my feelings in my home didn't even matter. Just logistics to work around? This wasn't just cheating. This wasn't even just being a crappy boyfriend. This was deliberate, strategic, long-term manipulation to steal my entire life and give it to someone else. He'd thought through every detail, every lie, every step of how to remove me from my own apartment. I asked Sally if she was absolutely sure about all of this, and she laid out even more evidence. Photos of him coming out of maternity stores carrying shopping bags. Multiple shots of him at Babies R Us loading a cart with baby stuff. Pictures of him and Kaylee at restaurants I recognized. The same places he'd told me he'd gone to alone or with Martin. She'd tracked his car too, documenting everywhere he went. Timestamps showing his car parked at Kaylee's apartment complex when he'd texted me saying he was at the gym. His car at that restaurant on nights he'd told me he was helping Martin with something. She even had photos of them at the mall together looking at cribs. Him at Target alone buying what looked like maternity vitamins based on the store section he was in. When I got home that night, Damon was making pasta and acting completely normal. Asked me how my day was. Told me about some funny video he'd seen, mentioned that we should probably have his mom over for dinner soon. Just completely casual, like he wasn't actively planning to kick me out of my own home and replace me with his pregnant girlfriend. I couldn't do it anymore. I couldn't pretend. I sat down at the kitchen table and told him we needed to talk. He got this annoyed look on his face like I was being dramatic, but he sat down across from me. I asked him point blank who Kaylee was. I watched his entire face change. Like literally watched the color drain out and his expression go from annoyed to panicked in about 2 seconds. He started to say he didn't know anyone named Kaylee and I cut him off. Told him I knew everything. About the pregnancy, about the plans to move her into my apartment. He tried to deny it at first. Said I was being paranoid and crazy and that I'd clearly been listening to too many true crime TikToks. Then when I told him I had photos and messages and a complete timeline, he switched tactics. Started saying it wasn't what it looked like. That Kaylee had been pursuing him and he'd made a mistake, but it didn't mean anything. I asked him how a 12-week pregnancy and planning to steal my apartment didn't mean anything. How does that equal a mistake? He actually had the nerve to say that he'd been confused about what he wanted and that Kaylee had gotten pregnant on purpose to trap him, but he was going to break it off with her and commit to me. I asked him when exactly he was planning to break it off. Before or after he moved her into my home office turned nursery? He started backtracking again, saying he'd never actually planned to do that and I was misunderstanding the situation. He kept changing his story depending on what I said I knew. First it was just a fling, then it was serious but ending, then she'd forced herself on him. Then he was the victim because she got pregnant deliberately. Every single excuse contradicted the last one. He couldn't keep his lies straight anymore because there were too many of them. Finally, I told him I wanted him out. Not eventually, not when it was convenient, out, that night. He immediately started crying and begging, saying he had nowhere to go and that we could work through this if I'd just give him a chance. He swore he'd never see Kaylee again, that he'd be the boyfriend I deserved, that he'd get a job and help with rent. I told him he'd had 2 years to be the boyfriend I deserved, and he'd chosen to spend the last months of that time building a life with someone else. Then I took out my phone and showed him some of the photos Sally had given me. His face when he saw them was almost worth the $500 I'd paid the PI. He knew he was caught. Completely, totally, undeniably caught. He couldn't spin this or explain it away or make me doubt myself. The evidence was right there. He got angry then, started yelling about how I'd invaded his privacy by hiring someone to follow him, said I was a controlling psycho who couldn't handle that he'd found someone better, that Kaylee understood him in ways I never had and she was carrying his child so she'd always be in his life whether I liked it or not. There it was. The real Damon coming out now that the mask was off. I told him he had until the end of the week to get his stuff and get out. He started saying he had legal rights as a tenant and I couldn't just kick him out and I told him to look up the lease because his name wasn't on it and he'd never paid a single month of rent. He slept on the couch that night and I locked my bedroom door. Haven't slept more than an hour at a time since because I keep waking up wondering if this is real. Tomorrow I'm changing the locks the second he leaves for wherever he actually goes during the day. I've already packed up some of his stuff, and I'm going to have the rest waiting for him by Friday. The thing that keeps running through my head is that woman on the phone asking if he'd told me yet. Told me what? That he was leaving? That there was a baby? That I was being demoted from girlfriend to obstacle in his way? What was the timeline where I was supposed to find out about all this? I'll update again once he's actually out and I can think straight. Right now, I'm just trying to get through each day without completely losing it. Last update. Okay, so I know it's only been like 2 weeks since my last post, but so much has happened, and I need to tell you all because honestly, this turned into something I never could have predicted. So remember how I said Damon was supposed to be out by Friday? Yeah, that didn't happen smoothly at all. Wednesday morning, he was still trying to convince me we could work it out. I woke up to him sitting at the foot of my bed, trying to have some big emotional conversation about how we'd built a life together and I couldn't just throw it away. I told him the only thing we'd built together was a lie because I'd been building a relationship while he'd been building an exit strategy. He started going on about how Kaylee meant nothing and the baby probably wasn't even his, and he'd just been scared of commitment with me so he'd self-sabotaged. I asked him how planning to steal my apartment and turn my office into a nursery was self-sabotage and he literally couldn't answer that. Just stared at me trying to come up with another lie. Then he tried a different angle. Started talking about all the good times we'd had, remember when we went to that concert, remember our first vacation, remember when I helped him through his dad's surgery, and something in me just snapped. I'd been trying to stay calm and handle this maturely, but I was done. I told him, yeah, I remembered all of that. I remembered paying for that concert because he was broke. I remembered paying for that vacation including his plane ticket because he didn't have a credit card. I remembered sitting in that hospital waiting room for 8 hours while he was with his family and then coming home and making dinner for everyone because his mom was too stressed to cook. I remembered 2 years of paying rent alone, buying groceries alone, covering his car insurance when he couldn't, lending him money that he never paid back. And what did I get for all of that? 8 months of him planning to replace me with a younger model and kick me out of my own home. Months of him taking my money and my support and my love while building a whole different future with someone else. He'd been using me as a bank account with benefits while promising someone else the life I thought we were building together. He tried to interrupt and I told him I wasn't finished. I asked him if Kaylee knew he was broke, if she knew he hadn't had a real job in over a year, if she knew that the apartment he was planning to move her into was mine, not his, if she knew he'd been sleeping in my bed every night while calling her baby on the phone. Did she know any of the truth or had he just fed her the same BS he'd fed me? His face told me everything. She had no idea. He'd probably told her he had his life together, that he was some great guy who was being held back by his difficult roommate situation. I wondered out loud how long it would take before he started using her money the same way he'd used mine, before she became the next temporary placeholder while he looked for someone better. That's when he got nasty. Started yelling about how I'd always been controlling, how I held money over his head, how I never let him just be himself. Said the reason he'd gone to Kaylee was because she didn't make him feel like a failure every day. She believed in him and supported his dreams while I just nagged him about getting a job. I actually laughed. Asked him what dreams exactly. The dream of living rent-free in someone else's apartment. The dream of having 2 girlfriends who both paid his bills. The dream of never having to be a responsible adult because there was always some woman taking care of him. He called me a bunch of names I'm not going to repeat here. and I told him he had until 6 p.m. Thursday to get every single thing he owned out of my apartment, or I was changing the locks and putting it all on the curb. He said I was being unreasonable, and I told him unreasonable was planning to make someone homeless in their own apartment so you could move in your pregnant side piece. Thursday was absolute chaos. His mom called me at work asking what was going on, because Damon had told her I'd kicked him out for no reason. I told her to ask her son about Kaylee and the baby, and there was dead silence on the line. Then she started saying boys make mistakes and surely we could work through this, and I told her I wasn't interested in raising her adult son anymore. She could do that herself. She got huffy and said I was being cruel and punishing him for being human. I asked her if she'd be saying the same thing if he'd done this to Alicia instead of to me. If some guy had lived off Alicia's money for 2 years while planning to kick her out and move in his pregnant girlfriend, would she be telling her daughter to forgive him? She hung up on me. Alicia actually texted me later that day apologizing for being dragged into the pregnancy test lie. Said she'd had no idea what was going on, and she was sorry her brother turned out to be such a piece of garbage. At least someone in that family had some sense. When I got home Thursday evening, there were boxes everywhere, and Damon was loading stuff into Martin's truck. Martin gave me this awkward wave, and I felt bad because he'd clearly been roped into helping without knowing the full story. I told him he might want to ask Damon about the secret girlfriend and baby before offering to be his roommate, and Martin's eyes went so wide. After they left, I walked through the apartment and started really looking at what was mine versus what was his. The TV, mine. The couch, mine. The kitchen table, mine. The bed, the dresser, the coffee maker, the dishes, the towels, the decorations, all mine. I'd furnished this entire place and he'd contributed basically nothing except his clothes and his lies. But here's where it gets good. I started finding stuff he'd hidden. In the back of the closet there was a duffel bag with baby clothes in it. Newborn onesies and little socks and a stuffed elephant still with the tags on. He'd been shopping for this baby and hiding it in my closet. The absolute audacity. In his nightstand drawer, I found a folder with apartment listings. All 1-bedrooms, all in the price range of my rent, all circled with notes like good neighborhood for kids and close to work. He'd been planning this move down to the specific location. There were even printouts about breaking leases and tenant rights. He'd done his research on how to screw me over. The worst part was finding a draft text in an old phone he'd left in the drawer. It said his Aunt Sally had been diagnosed with stage 4 cancer and needed to move in immediately for treatment. And he was so sorry, but could I please find somewhere else to stay for a few months while they dealt with this family emergency? There was no Aunt Sally. I'd met his whole family. This was the lie he was planning to use to kick me out. A fake dying aunt. Who even does that? I took photos of everything. Every piece of evidence I found. Not because I needed it for anything legal, but because I wanted proof that I wasn't crazy. That this had really been his plan all along. Friday morning, I went to Home Depot and bought new locks. The guy who helped me was super nice and showed me how to install them myself. By noon, my apartment was completely secured and Damon's key didn't work anymore. He texted me freaking out saying he'd forgotten some stuff and needed to get back in, and I told him to make a list and I'd leave it outside the building. He showed up Saturday morning and I watched from my window as he loaded the boxes I'd left. He kept looking up at my window and I just stared back until he left. That was the last time I saw him in person. For about a week and a half, it was quiet. No calls, no texts, nothing. I was starting to think maybe he'd actually just moved on with Kaylee and his new life. I deep cleaned the apartment, rearranged furniture, bought some new decorations that were actually my style instead of the neutral boring stuff he'd always wanted. Started making the place feel like mine again. Then last Monday, my phone rang at like 10 p.m. It was Damon. He was sobbing. At first I thought maybe someone had died or something serious had happened. Then I started making out the words. Kaylee had left him. Just straight up left. Took the money he'd been saving, which I'm guessing was actually money he'd borrowed from someone because he sure didn't have any savings when he was living with me, and disappeared. Blocked him on everything. He couldn't find her, couldn't contact her, had no idea where she'd gone. And the baby? He had no way of knowing if she was even keeping it, or if it was really his or anything. And now he couldn't afford rent on the place he'd moved into. He'd signed a lease thinking Kaylee would be splitting costs. But she was gone, and he was stuck with a full month's rent he couldn't pay. He'd already gotten a notice from the landlord. He was going to be evicted. He was calling to ask if I would take him back, if he could move back in just temporarily until he got back on his feet. He swore he'd get a job this time. He'd pay me back for everything. He'd be a better boyfriend. He just needed help this one time. I let him finish his whole spiel. Let him cry and beg and make all his promises. Then I asked him if he remembered what he'd said to me during our last fight, when he told me Kaylee understood him better than I ever had. He tried to say he'd been angry and hadn't meant it, but I cut him off. Told him I'd actually thought about that a lot over the past 2 weeks. And I'd realized he was right. Kaylee did understand him better than I did. She understood that he was a user and a liar, and she got out before she got stuck supporting him forever like I had been. She understood his value perfectly, which was 0, and acted accordingly. I told him he could call his mom since she'd been so understanding about his mistakes. Or maybe Martin would let him couch surf. Or maybe he should have thought about this before he spent months planning to make me homeless while living off my money. Then he tried to get angry, saying I owed him something after everything we'd been through. I asked him what exactly I owed him. More rent money? More grocery money? More car insurance payments? Should I Venmo him for all the emotional labor I'd wasted on him too? He actually had the audacity to say that he'd been a good boyfriend and I was being unfair. That living with him hadn't been that bad and I was acting like he'd been some kind of monster. I reminded him about the fake dying aunt plan and asked him to explain how that wasn't monstrous. He went quiet. Then he switched back to begging. Said he'd made mistakes, but everyone deserves a second chance. That he'd learned his lesson and he'd never do anything like this again. That he loved me and wanted to make things right. I told him he'd had 2 years worth of chances and he'd used every single one to lie to my face. That his idea of making things right was getting caught and facing consequences. and that him saying he loved me while trying to move his pregnant girlfriend into my apartment was genuinely insulting to anyone who's ever actually been in love. I told him that he told me during our fight that I was temporary, and Kaylee was his future. Well, congratulations, I said. His future had arrived and it turned out it sucked. That's what happens when you build your life on lies and using people. Eventually everyone figures out what you are and leaves. He tried to say something else, but I hung up. He called back immediately and I declined it. He called 6 more times that night. I blocked his number. He sent me a friend request on Facebook from a new account and I blocked that. Tried to DM me on Instagram and I blocked that. Yesterday his mom called again. I almost didn't answer, but I was curious what she'd have to say now. She started off all nice asking how I was doing and I immediately knew she wanted something. Sure enough, she asked if Damon could stay with me just for a little while until he figured things out. I asked her why she couldn't let him stay with her and she said something about not having space and boundaries and him needing to be independent. So basically she didn't want to deal with him either, but thought I should. I told her no and she got upset. Started saying I was being vindictive and holding a grudge and that this was affecting his mental health. I told her that her son had affected my mental health by making me doubt my own reality for months while he lived a double life. That he'd affected my financial health by living off me like a parasite for 2 years. And that if she was so worried about him, she could open up her own home to him instead of trying to guilt me into taking him back. She said some things about me being cold-hearted and not understanding what family means, and I reminded her that I wasn't family. Her son had made that clear when he decided I was just a temporary stop on his way to a better life. Then I hung up and blocked her number too. Someone in the comments on my first post said that the trash took itself out, and honestly that's exactly what happened. Kaylee did me a favor by showing him exactly how it feels to be used and abandoned. And now he gets to figure out how to be an adult without a woman bankrolling his entire existence. I'm done with updates after this because honestly there's nothing left to update about. Damon is my past and I'm focused on my future. A future where I'm not anyone's temporary stop or convenient resource. Where I'm actually valued instead of used. You all helped me realize I deserved so much better than what I was accepting. I hope anyone reading this who's in a similar situation realizes it too.